Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round two coverage of my games from the 2018 Western States Open. So round two was played Friday evening at starting at 7 p.m. Round one was played starting Friday at noon. And after my round one loss, I just relaxed for a bit, so I had a chance to get some rest. And then I came back and I was facing a player rated 1822. My rating for the tournament was 1861. And he was, I think, the oldest player in the tournament that I faced. One of the older players there in any case. And with the white pieces, I started off with e4. He went e5. I was happy to see this. I was a little bit shaky on my form in the first game, and so it's nice to get a comfortable opening. And this is maybe the opening I'm most familiar with. It's the one I've played the longest in my over the board games. It is the Ruy Lopez. So it's kind of like going back and visiting an old friend. It's reassuring in a way. You know the moves, you know the plans, and you can just kind of relax. Now, after a shaky start like that, I resolved to just play a little more slowly than usual. Try to take my time and see if I can dig up all of the tactical possibilities that I was overlooking in that first game. I think that's kind of good advice in general. And it's a thing that I do also just when I'm warming up to a game. Instead of just rattling out these moves, which I know by heart, I stop to think about them one by one and consider the tactics a little bit before playing the move, just kind of warming up the tactical centers of the brain. But so far, this is just a mainline Ruy Lopez. We're playing all the normal moves. I castle here, leaving this pawn undefended for a moment. And here's a crossroads. When I have black, originally I played the closed Ruy Lopez with bishop to e7, and that's the most popular move here, and that's what my opponent played. After a while, I decided to not continue to explore those long lines, but to look for other lines, and I started playing this way with b5 and bishop to c5, and I think this is an interesting way to play. It's the neo-Archangelsk variation, and I've played that many times as black, and I think it's just the bishop e7 line, the closed lines. There's a lot of long, slow maneuvering, and I got kind of tired of it. We'll get to a point in the game, and I'll talk about that a little bit further. So that's one option, going for the neo-Archangelsk here. And a third very popular option is to go for the open Ruy Lopez. These are probably the top three moves. So the open Ruy Lopez, you just grab the pawn, and then white, you usually give the pawn back. White plays d4. You could continue taking, but then you get into trouble with pins along the open e-file and the uncastled king. So the normal move here is first to kick the bishop and then play d5 to support the knight and just give the pawn back like this. And then you play bishop e6. This blocks that pawn from coming forward and also defends the d-pawn, which was under fire from the queen and the bishop. So pretty standard position here, and leads to interesting play. White continues with either knight bd2 or pawn to c3. This bishop can come out here, and in the pawn to c3 lines, there's actually potentially lines where black takes on f2 there. And he gets a rook and a pawn for the two pieces, but also rounds up another pawn somehow through tactical means, and that's also an interesting line. Anyway, let's go back to the game. I just wanted to mention those are the options here. Black chose the oldest move here, well, the most popular move here. I actually don't know which came first, with bishop e7, the closed Ruy Lopez. So I play rook e1. At this point, because there's no longer as many tactics on the e-file, you do need to stop and defend the e-pawn. And now black kicks my bishop back. This is all still the main line. And then here he castles. So castling in this position is a very interesting move. The actual main line continues with d6 here. And we will transpose back into this. So I won't talk about this further. What castles does is it introduces the martial gambit. And, well, let's see, to explain this. After d6, white normally replies c3 with the idea of building up a big center with d4. If white does the same thing after black castles, back up, black castles here instead of playing d6 and white plays c3, black can actually play the move d5, and this is the martial gambit. You take this pawn, this is the way the main line goes, and let's see, black takes back, and then you can grab this pawn. Let's see, you take with the knight, he takes, and you take back. So that was the point. The exchange there opened up the rook onto that e-pawn, which was insufficiently defended. Now this knight is under fire. It can come back to f6. That was the way Marshall played the martial gambit. That's the original martial gambit, or the modern way of playing it is to defend it with pawn to c6 there, defending it that way. And then black gets a lot of play here. If you just kind of look at this position, one move black is going to play is bishop here, putting this bishop on a good diagonal with tempo, and the rook is probably going to retreat somewhere. So if you just look at the position, white has castled, black is castled, but white's only pieces that are developed are the rook, which is going to be sent away, and the bishop. And this knight is not so easy to get into the game. It's blocked out by this pawn structure at the moment. This bishop is blocked out. So this gambit is occurring exactly at a moment when white, who has been slowly preparing with the Ruy Lopez to build up some big center and a kingside attack, it's just caught a little bit awkwardly placed. And white's bishops have these beautiful open lines they can go to. The light squared bishop can come out along either diagonal, really, and then this bishop can come out here and come out on this diagonal. The queen jumps in very quickly. It's a dangerous position, and so I avoid that. I don't go for the martial when I have white. I play an anti-martial move. So the move here that black played, castling right at this point, this is indicating black is interested in the martial gambit and just wanting to see how white reacts. And there are ways to play against it. You can play with a4. You can play with d3, just shoring up the center. Anything but c3, pretty much. The move I played is maybe the most common of the anti-martial moves. It's h3. What this does is if black continues going for something like the martial gambit, it's taking away one of the quick attacking ideas, so the queen doesn't come out with tempo on h7 and the knight can't hop into this square. So it takes away a couple of attacking ideas from black, and the martial gambit is no longer as effective. So after h3, the most common response is to play d6, and then I play c3, and now we've just transposed back into the main line closed Ruy Lopez. And here, once again, black has choices. The retreat of the knight is actually a line, the Breyer variation, moving this bishop, I think, to b7, the Zaitsev variation, or a knight to a5 is the most common. This is the Chigorin variation. Kicking my bishop back, and then playing c5. So black is looking to counter white's attempt to dominate the center, but white goes ahead with d4. This is still following a main line. This is about the point, when I used to play this as black, this is about the point where I'd start to get confused and have trouble remembering the moves. But one thing to think about in this position is that after d4, this pawn on e5 is really under fire. White is actually threatening to win that pawn, so black will usually play a move to defend that pawn. The most common move is queen c7. That's what my opponent played, but also knight here can be played. And I think also bringing this knight back, yeah, that helps defend the center as well. So those are all playable moves. But queen c7 is the most popular. Now I go knight bd2. The knight is going on this typical journey you see in the Ruy Lopez, coming out here to g3 or maybe to e3. And of course, before playing this move, you always have to be careful that you've got the you've got adequate control over the center, because the knight here momentarily is blocking the queen's view of the d-pawn, so you need to make sure you're not just going to lose a pawn here, but you have enough force to hold it here. So black takes, I took, and then if he keeps taking, I can take with the knight. And then right here, black played the move rook to e8, and this is actually the first move. We're on move 13 here that's not in the opening book. Everything has been totally standard so far. And the line continues. I just want to show you how the line continues because it's kind of interesting. The knight goes to c6, and now there really is a threat to take this d-pawn. And you know, you might think this knight would just continue to f1 and do the usual journey, but actually the main line goes like this: knight to b3, and I don't understand all the ins and outs of why this is preferable. But anyway, this solidly defends the pawn, but black says, okay, I'm going to chase that knight away with a5. Then the bishop hops out, and black pushes on with a4, and the knight goes back to d2. And then, well, black develops from here. Bishop d7 is pretty common, and white develops rook to c1. And this knight can still do that journey that it often does. So it's just like it did this little hop to here and back in order to let this bishop out and to free up the c1 square. So I think it just leads to a better arrangement of white's pieces, and that's why that is the main line. Anyway, just for completeness, I just wanted to mention that. Also, it's helped remind me in case I get into these situations. I sometimes forget these little nuances. But he played rook e8, and so we're out of the book, and we're just on our own resources at the moment. And as I said, I'd been playing slowly and just thinking about my moves, so I was feeling okay. It's a very comfortable opening for white. White gets more space in the center, slightly more space, not a whole lot, and just a slow building attack on the king side, and we'll see some of those features. So I just continue with my normal journey with the knight. I could have, and I thought about this move, I could have played b3 here. That seems like a reasonable move. It keeps his knight from hopping into this c4 square, which could be annoying. But I decided I was more interested in getting this knight into the game, getting it into its position over here on the king side. So knight f1, he went ahead and took. You can question this decision, but the chess engine thinks this is fine for black. I mean, speaking as the white player here, I'm always happy to see this because it leaves black with this backwards pawn, so it gives me a target and I can shoot for that. But if black plays this correctly, black gets a lot of activity, so this is still all fine. So bishop to b7, a good diagonal for the bishop, hitting my pawn here. And I played bishop to f4. This move is actually maybe a bit questionable. The chess engine thinks that black is pretty much equal after this, so it's kind of giving up any sort of opening edge I might have had. It wants me to continue with knight to g3. And that's also a very reasonable move too. But I wanted to get my bishop off the back rank. I wanted to get a rook to the c file. Something that can happen in these positions is that a rook can come to the c file and put pressure on these pieces over here. Now at the moment this knight is defending the bishop as well as the queen, so it's not an immediate issue. But if I want to move this knight somewhere, the knight to f5 idea is looking pretty good here. I have to make sure that this bishop is cared for, and one of the ways to do that is to get this bishop out of the way, get a rook over here defending the bishop, and also gain a tempo on the queen. So those are the kind of things I was thinking about. Played bishop f4, and he could play g6 at this point. This is one of the points at which g6 is a reasonable move. You might not think of this if you're not familiar with this setup, but it's a very common idea here. It's basically twofold. One is it's keeping the knight from hopping into the f5 square, or at least it'll turn it into a sacrifice. And then also this bishop can reroute to the g7 square, and then this rook is open on the e file. So that little rearrangement of pieces is very common here. Instead, black went with knight c4. This is also an okay move here. I kicked it with b3. I didn't want it hanging around there. It sort of interferes with my freedom of pieces. Also, I mean, my pawn was hanging there. So He plays knight e5. I think that was his intention. I don't think there was anything to be gained by trying to jump in here and hit my queen. It doesn't have, yeah, it doesn't have an escape square. So goes back. I developed my rook to the c file. That was my intent. And he puts his queen over here on b6, so getting it out of the action there. And now I play knight to g3. So everything, I think, has gone fine. And, you know, in spite of what I said about white giving up the opening advantage with this early, or this bishop f4 move, I think white still has a slight edge here. And right here, g6 is definitely indicated. Although the chess engine finds another line, so I just wanted to show this to you for the sake of interest. I don't think a human player would find this idea, but it's pretty interesting. It's knight to g6. Okay, you know, why are you giving up this good square for the knight? And well, one thing is it hits this bishop with tempo, so the bishop needs to reposition itself. The line I looked at was bishop to g5, you know, hoping to, if that knight moves, trade the dark squared bishop off. Let's see, and here black can play d5. That's the kind of amazing idea. So I would push on with e5. That seems like the natural response. And I think that was a computer suggestion too. You know, why not just increase the pressure here, force some trades, and this e5 can have a real inhibiting effect on black's piece placement. And black doesn't respond immediately, but plays bishop to c5. And so I guess you could say this position is a mess. You know, white's threatening to take my knight. If the knight moves, there's also the pawn on f2 hanging with a check and a fork of king and rook, and black's knight is hanging. Now, the chess engine rates this position as about even, for what it's worth. I don't think I would play that way. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. Very dynamic play. But I think just playing with g6 is the right answer here for most players. So my opponent went knight f to d7, and actually after this, he's in kind of a bad way. Sort of surprising, but the thing is that that's a feature of the Ruy Lopez. It's this slow building attack where white gradually, you know, takes over the center and points all his pieces at white's king. And at some point, black has to be very careful to avoid just getting blown away by the attack. And we're on the verge of that here. And this knight to d7 allows a very strong attack from white. You know, I'm not sure what his idea was. He might have been thinking about putting the bishop on this diagonal. That it also helps defend this knight. Maybe he wants to take back with the knight here in case I trade off and keep a good piece on this square. But, well, I have some moves with tempo now, and that's how you often initiate an attack. You look for tempo moves. So start with knight to f5. I've gotten that knight onto that great square now that he never played, since black didn't play g6. So he wants to keep this bishop. It's an important defender of some of these dark squares around the king. He drops it back to f8, where it defends g7. Now I can move my bishop with tempo. Bishop to e3 hits the queen. And he doesn't, he can't really walk into this. You know, I can attack that piece. So he really has to move the queen. The queen doesn't have many good squares. If it goes to a4, you know, a5. Queen a5 is probably a possibility here. But the queen is a bit out of play over there, and that's certainly very dangerous. I would ignore the threat to the a-pawn and just bring some more pieces out to the queen side, I think. So anyway, he went with queen c7, which he had to think about for a long time, because you have to be sure that there's no discovered attacks on the queen that win anything. But in fact, this is the chess engine's recommended move, so it was safe to play here. But I'm not immediately going after the queen. What I'm going for is this kingside attack. I play f4 to kick this knight away, so that I can get my queen out to the g4 square. And he dropped his knight back to g6. The chess engine thinks the best defense is knight to c6, but even this leads to a really strong attack for white. So e5, pawn takes, knight h6 check. Already these kind of sacrifices are possible. So black takes the knight, The queen comes in with check. King runs over here to h8, and then the queen goes to f5, and and there's this lineup threatening mate, and black has to start giving material back. He can play e4 here and then sack the exchange on e4 to stop that attack. I think that has to be played, but anyway, so white has got actually a winning attack here, although it doesn't immediately crash through. I would show you the ending, but it's a strong attack that should be winning for white if well played, but it goes on. Anyway, he went knight to g6, and knight is just a bit of a target over there. I push on with h4 immediately. I mean, it's in the way of my pieces. He's got the right idea to defend the king side, but it's not stable there. And this pawn is defended, so there's no help in taking that pawn, and he can't actually stop it from coming forward. Well, he can slow it down, but I can just grab that. I could take with either piece. Anyway, yeah, he can't play h5 there is the point. I can just take it. So he brings the rook over, plays rook a to d8. I push on with h5. He drops his knight back to h8. Not a happy move, but where else is it going to go? It needs to stay around the king side to defend. If it goes over here, I'll just trade it off and bring another knight into f5 and bring my queen in. So things are looking pretty dire. A knight to h8 is relatively an okay move. So now I drop this bishop back to b1. I'm opening up this line for my rook, allowing that to get into the game, putting the bishop back on a safe square. He goes queen to b8, and I go queen to g4 finally. This move actually took me a long time to decide on, because it's it threatens mate, so certainly something you have to watch out for, because knight to here is now checkmate. The king has no squares and the pawn is pinned. So it's a very forcing move, but you have to find a follow-up here that's good for you. And I did not see anything immediately winning. I think it is winning, but it's a slow move. But I just it's the most direct move here, and it seems to be the best move. But it took me a long time to decide on. I had to look for other moves that were better, because there's no immediate breakthrough. If black plays g6 now, this is probably the best defense. He can take with the f pawn. Let's see, I can reposition this bishop to this diagonal, continuing to take squares away from his king, maybe threatening to get something to g7. He can bring his rook up. I was also potentially threatening a sacrifice here at some point. And now this pawn is pinned, so he's not threatening to take my knight. I can bring this knight back anyway, though. I guess this is the threatened sacrifice, so this rook was defending in advance. Let's see, the other rook comes to the e-file, and then this knight hops into h5. And, this was the computer-suggested line. It thinks that white has a winning attack here, but it's still no immediate breakthrough. I think the follow-up is moves like f5 and rook to f1 to finally break through. And if his king starts to run, I have to figure out what to do with this knight. But I guess if his king starts to run, he loses the knight in the corner. So that's a problem for him. Anyway, that's how best play would proceed. He tried defending in a different way. It's kind of interesting. Rook e6, so just defends. I can't place a piece there. Actually, I guess I could consider moving a pawn forward, but I found another idea. So if you want to look for an idea for white here, why don't you see what you would play in this position? I think it's a good position. White has a winning attack. It's just a question of what's the best move here. What's the right way to proceed? Okay, pause the video if you want some more time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away. I played the move knight takes g7. And this is a winning tactic. It's maybe not the only one in the position. So if you found some other move, I wouldn't take any points away. But I wanted to keep this g-pawn back and keep h-pawn back and keep control of this g6 square, so his rook couldn't come over and attack my queen like that. So what did white try in this position? He took it. And then this is my idea. I drop the knight into f5. So, a lot of times you could play this kind of tactic where you push this pawn forward to win the pinned piece. But in this case, he's got that h6 square covered, but he doesn't have knight f5. And now I'm actually just threatening checkmate on g7. And he needs to play the move knight g6. That's really the only move here that where that continues the game. So this gets me my piece back, and my attack continues. And it's still a winning attack at that point. He actually played after knight to after I played knight f5. He played knight f6, hitting my queen, but he failed to protect against the mate. So the game finished very quickly right there. But in fact, I did still have a winning attack. So anyway, that was nice to get a win in, especially after my first round loss. That can restore your confidence, help reassure yourself that you're not in such bad form after all, and maybe you were going to have a decent tournament. It's also, I think, a good lesson on the Ruy Lopez. The thing is, it's a very slow building attack, but if you let white continue unfettered, it can turn deadly very quickly. And we saw that in this case. It was just that one move when he retreated his knight to d7. At that point, white actually had a winning attack, and it's a pretty innocuous seeming move, but black really needs to be careful and make sure he has control of that f5 square with a move like g6. So anyway, interesting game. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too, and I will see you later. Stay tuned for round 3 coverage. Bye-bye.